Hello there and welcome to the program. I am Imonia Marere. In recent years, the discourse on genetically modified organisms, otherwise known as GMOs, has gained significant traction in Africa. It has sparked both enthusiasm and concern. GMOs are organisms whose genetic materials have been altered through genetic engineering on the promise of enhanced agricultural productivity, pest resistance, and nutritional benefits. Promoters of GMO say it presents a potential solution to the pressing challenges of food insecurity, erratic climate conditions, and a rapidly growing population on the continent. They argue that GMOs could revolutionize African agriculture, making crops more resilient to pests and diseases and thrive in adverse environmental conditions while giving more yield and higher quality. Now, proponents of GMOs in Nigeria argue that it can help in achieving self-sufficiency in food production, reduce dependency on imports, and improve the livelihoods of farmers. However, concerns have been raised about environmental and health impacts, biosafety, ethical considerations, and socioeconomic impact on smallholder farmers. The question is also asked, why are GMO plants and livestock meant for only the African market? Is it true that seeds of GMO plants cannot be replanted and their birds and animals cannot be mated to reproduce because their fertility has been genetically removed? Why are African governments making laws to criminalize farmers' refusal to cultivate GMO seeds, whereas GMO seeds and livestock are not tolerated in the US and other Western countries that are pushing it down the throats of Africans? Well, these are the issues that we will be trying to examine on this program today. And I'm joined by some specialists who will give us some insight into the introduction of GMOs in Nigeria and the rest of Africa. Right here in the studio, I'm joined by Mrs. Hawa Tahir Ahmed. She is the Director of Biosafety Enforcement and Operations at the Department of Operations Department of the National Biosafety Management Agency, NBMA. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're also joined by Abisabo Adamu. He is an Assistant Chief Scientific Officer at the National Biosafety Management Agency. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Adamu.
Thank you for having me.
We expect to also join us Mr. Donald Ikena Ofuegbu, who is a Senior Program Manager at the Heinrich Böll Stiftung here in the nation's capital, Abuja. Hopefully, he should be joining us in the studio. And network permitting, which will also have joining us from Benin, the Edo State capital, Mr. Nimo Bassi. Nimo Bassi is the Director, Head of Mother Earth, environmental activist, and an author. So, we will be taking on all these issues about all the controversies about the GMO, genetically modified organisms, or genetically modified plants and foods that are being introduced into our society here in Nigeria. Only on Thursday, 4 agencies of government, the Agricultural Research Council of Nigeria, the National Biotechnology and Development Agency, the National Agricultural Seed Council, and the National Biosafety Management Agency addressed a joint press conference where they tried to convince Nigerians that genetically modified foods are safe for human consumption. But are they? We'll be answering those questions when we return from this very short break. Stay with us.
dream. The Nigeria we need is the united, indissoluble, and cohesive Nigeria, which guarantees equity, fairness, justice, and prosperity for its citizens. That is our focus on people, politics, and power. It is fresh, insightful, impactful. It's a must-watch. People, politics, and power on AIT.
Thank you so much for staying with us. Mrs. Hawa Tahir Ahmed is the Director, Biosafety Enforcement and Operations Department of the National Biosafety Management Agency. First, educate us about what GMOs are.
GMOs are genetically modified organisms. They are plants or anything that the DNA has been altered. This happens when you have to insert a gene of interest into that particular plant or animal. Like, for example, like the PBR cowpea, which is Maruca resistant now, which has been approved. So what happens is the DNA has been altered. And what you do is just for you to insert your gene of insert. Let me just use like a layman language to define that. I am wearing a cloth that has an ash color. So the other person is wearing a cloth that has a blue color. So if you want that his cloth to have a cloth that contains a red color, what he does is just to go to the lab, sequence the DNA, and they take that particular gene that is making my clothes red and insert it into his own DNA. And he was going to have an offspring that has that red color. So in situations like that, we have crops that are insect resistant. We have crops that are drought tolerant. So in this instance, formally our farmers will just like do what is called like the budding and just match everything together. They match what the DNAs they need and the ones that they don't need. So in genetic modification, you only take your gene of insert and insert it in whatever thing you want it to be modified for, what you want it to be modified
Give us examples of crops in Nigeria or plants in Nigeria today that have undergone this process.
Oh, it's the PBR cowpea. The PBR cowpea, the BT cowpea is resistant to Maruca resistant. Our farmers lost almost 70 to 80% of what they've grown because of that Maruca pest. So the BT cowpea is a bacteria that was taken from the soil. It's not a chemical. It's a bacteria that is found in the soil, which has been inserted into that beans, would allow you to, for the Maruca not to attack the plant. It's something that was getting from the soil, not that it's manufactured in the lab. It's just taken from the soil and inserted into the seed of that PBR cowpea. And that makes it resistant.
Is the PBR cowpea the only crop or plant in Nigeria today that has undergone that modification?
No, we've...
For instance, what happens to corn, potatoes, plantains, and all the other food items that Nigerians are familiar with?
What I want the audience to know now is that we've only approved 3 crops in Nigeria. We've approved one, the BT cotton, then the PBR cowpea, that's the BT cowpea, our normal beans, then the maize, that's the Taylor maize, which has been approved. So far, we've approved only 3 crops in Nigeria to be commercialized.
Okay, so these are the only 3 crops that have been
commercialized in Nigeria.
Approved.
Yes, approved.
Is there a possibility that as we move along, more crops will be approved?
Yes, as the technology is emerging, we have as the technology is emerging, we have to move. So once there's any other crop that will be, commercialized in Nigeria, it has to follow all through the regulatory process for it to be commercialized, as the first 3 have.
When you talk about commercialization, what do you exactly do?
When I mean by commercialization, that is when it's out in the market, because it starts from the containment process, which is in the lab, from the lab to confinement process. From the containment, it's transferred into a field which is confined, which is the confined field trial, which is in like a secluded area for it. Then from there, That's where they're testing it for, to see if it's going to do very well outside the lab. Then from the lab, there's what we do, the multilocational trials. We usually, the scientists pick like 3 regions where they do the multilocational trials to see how that plant will do in those 3 geopolitical zones, and to see the yield and all that before finally coming to apply to the NBME for commercialization. Commercialization means the general release of that crops to the market.
Okay. Mr. Adamu, you are the Chief Scientific Officer here. Now, has there been any scientific risk assessment of these genetically or this modification before their introduction into the Nigerian market? I ask that because in Europe, where there is a very limited number of plants or crops that are allowed, genetically modified plants that are allowed, there was a scientific risk assessment before that was done. Has that been done here in Nigeria?
Thank you very much. I think the point is this. The National Biosafety Management Agency's major function is to conduct risk assessments regarding any genetically modified organism that should be approved in Nigeria. You know, the agency is not a promoting agency, so we don't go out there to tell an applicant to submit an application. But if anybody wants to conduct research, he will now go ahead to submit application to the agency. And based on the mandate of the agency is to ensure that that product is safe before it is released into the environment. And on that note, any application that would want to scale through must be submitted to the agency, and the agency will conduct risk assessments of that particular application that has been submitted regarding a given crop. Coming back to what the agency has so far approved, we have so far approved for commercialization of telomerase, and we also approve for commercialization of PBR cowpea and also BT cotton. There are a lot of other crops that are still under the confined field trial process that have not yet passed through all the regulatory processes, and that is why we have not given approval to them. So the agency gives approval, conducts risk assessment of all these crops and certify them safe before they have been commercialized so far. So there is no any issue of safety concern that Nigerians should be worried about so far for telomerase and BT cowpea. And we also work very closely with other submissions by other international communities, organizations. Like even in Europe, for example, the European Food Safety Agency, most of our reviews will also put into consideration some of their own reviews and some of the issues they raise before we give final approval to those things.
I'm sure that as a scientist, you are aware that some of these crops are not, GMO crops are not allowed in certain countries of the world. They are not allowed, for instance, in the US, they are not allowed in Russia, they are not allowed in parts of Europe, and that's because of the kind of risk assessment that had been done prior to this time. And you say that they are safe for human consumption here, whereas over there, they do not think so. Yet they are the ones who are promoting and pushing them into Africa.
Yes, thank you. You know, there is a political aspect to this issue of GMO globally. America, for example, has, in fact, maybe you can just, in the recent time, that's maybe when you will see that maybe some states may not have given maybe approval for such, but in the US is one of the largest consumers of genetically modified organisms. And if you go to Europe, for example, they do not do cultivation, but they approve over 100 genetically modified organisms.
They don't cultivate it,
yes,
but they also do not consume it.
They consume it. Millions of metric tons.
And where do they come from?
Yes, from other countries. You see, there is a political aspect of genetically modified. If Europe, for example, will tell you that they don't cultivate, but they import for food, for feed, and for processing, that has to tell you that the issue is not really about the science, but the politics behind it.
So why do you think they import and they do not cultivate? What is their fear about cultivating those crops in their own countries?
Well, that might be based on to them, but the fact remains that one thing you need to understand is that Europe, when it comes to land mass, you know that they do not have much land compared to Africa, for example, and they also have other means of ensuring their own food security. But you know, in Nigeria, for example, or in Africa, we rely basically on this agriculture, and even technologically wise, you know that Europe are a bit farther than us. So they have other alternatives. So they can decide from the political angle to say, this is what we want to do. But so long as they are consuming it, using it for food, feed, and for processing, if you go to EFSA website, you will see a lot of approvals by the European Food Safety Authority, and they have been allowing the shipment of these crops into their country. So if they decide that they don't want to plant it, if it is really a safety issue, they shouldn't have been thinking of saying they want to import it.
Is it possible that they are not planting, they are not cultivating because it's dangerous to their own environment?
They've never given example, the reason behind they are not planting it. That's why I say it might be political. But the fact is that so long as they are... You see, when it comes to the issue of GMO
they are more conscious of their environmental, the environmental impact of such...
Yes, and you know, one thing you need to understand when it comes to the issue of GMO, the major concern, about 80% of the concern is on the food safety. The remaining percentage is for other environmental and other factors. For a country to agree to eat GMO, it means it has accepted the safety of that thing up to 80%. And for that, I think it's more of a political issue, and we will not want to make any comment regarding that. If they said they don't want to do it, I think that is based on to them, but they have not given any genuine reason behind why they are not planting, maybe on the issue of safety.
We've been told by the director, that's talking of Mrs. Hawa Tahir Ahmed, that 3 crops have been given commercial approval.
Commercialized.
Yes, commercialized approval in Nigeria. That's talking about the PBR bean and cotton as well as maize, right? Those are the 3 that have been. And just yesterday, 4 agencies of government, including the National Biosafety Management Agency, the Agric Research Council of Nigeria, the National Biotechnology and Development Agency, as well as the National Agric Seed Council, addressed a joint press conference where they insisted that GMO crops are safe for consumption in Nigeria. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, so basically I think it's as expected that these institutions would basically come into, say this position. But it's a question of on what basis and where are the evidence that proves that they are safe. We're all in Nigeria, so we know how institutions are funded. We know the challenges that are faced with our institution. So in all of these agencies that we've mentioned, nobody has mentioned NAFDAC also, because NAFDAC has the sole mandate to certify, approve, what we call food in this country. It's NAFDAC, it's their mandate. And so after all research has been done, all evidences, you need to still bring it on NAFDAC table. And NAFDAC would go through their own tests, get laboratories to work on these things and come out and say, public, go ahead, you can eat. Let me first of all say I admire the enthusiasm of the National Biosafety Agency. They also need to show we're working and we also need to get this done. But the issue it's bigger than just is GMO safe for food. It's way bigger than that. It's a question of our food sovereignty. It's an issue of how inclusive are the process. It's an issue of how open and transparent is the process also. NAFDAC is part of the governing board that regulates and constitutes, the working of the National Biosafety Management Agency. So if a NAFDAC, the agency was formed in 2015, 2016 after the act was formed. In 2018, NAFDAC came out publicly to say they've not certified any GMO food. Recently, they've also made out statements saying they've not approved or certified any GMO product as safe. So if a NAFDAC being on the governing council is coming out to say GMO is not safe, they've not certified, limits its use to non-food use, we should listen and we should pay attention. And why should we pay more attention? Because a lot of these people that you've mentioned saying GMO it's safe, we've done our research, we've done all the risk assessments, the public have not seen it. As I yesterday, I still went to the National Biosafety Management Agency website, looked through publication. I didn't see any of those risk assessments. I didn't see any of those documents. So one may also say, oh, he's not an expert, he's not a researcher, he wouldn't understand what's there. But we know people that do peer review journals, and we know there are lots of scientists in Nigeria that would like to get their hands on these documents and also proofread. So who are the people that have done this week's assessments? What are the methodologies? Where are the sample sizes? Where were the field trials done? What's the sustainability in terms of the risk assessments? And while we're talking about the GMO, I think when I came in, I heard him saying things like a lot of countries are taking GMO. Do you know that as we speak, 38 countries have GMO ban and under strict restriction, 19 of them are in EU. Over 79% of Nigeria's food exports are rejected in this country. Beans is still on ban in Nigeria. So think of it this way. If 38 countries have banned GMO, 19 of them are in EU. Russia, it's as good as a death sentence to bring GMO in their country. We're talking about France, we're talking about Germany, we're talking about a lot of countries. These are countries with high, better health standard, better scientists. A lot of the tests we do here in Nigeria, even by the agencies you've called, a lot of them have to take their samples from Nigeria to those countries to use their labs. We're all here, we're in the system, and we know what it means. How many laboratories do we have in Nigeria that are functioning? So in terms of methodology, you cannot just exclude the fact that a lot of countries have banned GMO. So if we're going to copy, let's copy right. A lot of these countries where they have GMO in their shops, they are properly labeled. In Nigeria, how do you effectively implement labeling? It's not enough to have the laws or the policies. How do you even implement labeling? And then for the GMOs, who owns them? Because these are crop and what they are designed. So GMOs can be herbicide resistance, or it can be insect resistance, or virus or bacterial resistance. So somebody needs to patent it. Somebody has ownership. Nigeria, as we speak, have laws that give patents right and control to the inventor or to the person that did the breeding of the seed. So Teller maize has an owner. The maize has an owner. All of these things you've mentioned, they have an owner. Now, our current farm systems require a lot of chemical pesticide. These chemicals that farmers have been applying, they not only kill the weeds, but they also kill other species. They kill beneficial insects, they kill indigenous species. So we have farmers that have said they cannot even see the okra they used to know of those days, the ogbono, they can't see them. So what is happening is we have a farm system that is depending on a lot of external farm inputs that are destroying our traditional farm system, that are destroying our biodiversity. And not only are they doing that, they are also giving the rights, the ownership and control of inputs through the use of technologies like this to companies, agrochemical companies, seed companies. And these companies are like 6 or 7 of them. So maybe I stop here. We go round.
Yes,
I take a break.
You need to stop there because I want to bring Mrs. Ahmed in at this point in time. The press conference yesterday by these 4 agencies, the AROCN, the NASC, the NBDA, and the NBMA, was that a response to the position of NAFDAC last week when the DG of NAFDAC said GMO foods are not safe for consumption?
I have to start by saying that, yes, NAFDA have been in our board, and we've signed an MOU with NAFDA in 2017 that any processed food, because for processed genetically modified food, is supposed to be certified by NAFDA, that any genetically modified food, once it's processed, if it's coming into the country, they have to get a biosafety permit first before being processed. And we have evidence in our office, that some superstores that wanted to import genetically modified food have applied to NAFDA for certification. And NAFDA asked them to come and get a biosafety permit first before they give them the NAFDA certification to import. As I'm telling you now, we've gone on surveillance some few months ago because of the MOU we've signed with NAFDA, that for any processed food, genetically modified processed food to be on the shelves, they have to bring a biosafety permit first. And we went on surveillance. bought some foods that have been approved by NAFDAC, that have NAFDAC number on it. We bought those products. We did our analysis in the lab. The result will be out for the public very soon. And those food are in the shelves, which National Biosafety Management Agency have not been contacted to import those products into the country.
Is there a possibility that these NAFDAC numbers are just being affixed by the importers of this food, that they may not actually have been approved by NAFDAC?
If those foods are in our shelves, that means NAFDAC is not doing their work. And for all the reviews, all the permits that were issued so far for importation of the grains, for importation of seed, for confined field trials, for multi-locationals, all the permits that we've granted. We have a biosafety desk officer in NAFDAC who also happens to be in that particular review, all the reviews that we've been doing. And in fact, some of them have even been trained internationally. And those are staff of NAFDAC. So for the Director General to come and say those things are not safe, I just don't know. I'm even surprised when I had it on the table.
Because I asked him earlier on about the risk assessment that has been done or is being planned by your agency, for instance. Because even in Europe and in the United States, they talk about the toxicity of genetically modified crops. They talk about the allergic reactions that come with these crops, the antibiotic resistance of these food items, and the immunosuppression of these items. And they also insist, particularly in the US, that genetically modified plants are a major cause of cancer.
This is what the antis usually say. Cancer has been in existence since before genetic modification came to being. And for any GM crop or product to be in the market, as you've mentioned earlier, the allergenicity, the toxicity, all these things are done in the risk assessment before it's finally commercialized for consumption. Cancer has been in existence even before the emergence of genetically modified organisms. And one thing I want everybody to know, we are not an extraordinary human beings. We all go to the same market. If I'm a regulator in MBME, and if I go to the market, I can identify that this food is genetically modified and I will not buy. I have my relatives that live in the rural areas. Will I go there and tell them not to buy a particular product? And in Nigeria, as we all know, these things come in sacks, and our local women, market women, put it in basins for them to measure. And more so, we have high rate of illiteracy in this country. They can't read it. Are we going to approve something that is going to be a problem or is going to kill people or going to cause problem? In one way or the other, we are also part of it. In fact, we are in it. So all the product that has been approved by MBMA so far, it has gone through all this risk assessment, it has been reviewed. And let me even take you through the biosafety process for release. Once an application dossier is submitted to the MBMA, that application is reviewed internally before constituting the National Biosafety Committee and the National Biosafety Technical Subcommittee. The National Biosafety Technical Subcommittee are experts on that particular crop that will be imported into the country. And it has about 15, sometimes to 20 members. They are members, experts on that particular crop or seeds that would be imported into the country. And before that committee is constituted, there is what we call the public notice. We display that application dossier in our website, and we publish it in 3 national dailies for 21 days for public inputs. So it's after the 21 days, when those responses were collated, that committee is constituted for the application to be reviewed. So I don't know this one, that after, it's just like the church marriage. You understand? They will say, if you have anything to say it, or you forever remain silent. So they will be there. They will not say anything. That public notice is in 3 dailies. It will be there for 21 days for anybody to give their own input for public response, for their own input into before that committee is constituted. And when that committee is constituted, that Biosafety Technical Subcommittee do an in-depth review, and all the permit that was granted so far is based on scientific findings. It's not something that anybody will just come and sit down and decide and say this is what we want in the market. It's based on scientific findings.
Adamu, I need to ask this question. Now, in Nigeria, we appear, or we do have a very, very fertile environment for farming and all that. So the question that one needs to ask, why do we need genetically modified crops? Why are we not more reliant on the organic crops that we have that can grow anywhere and give you the kind of yield that you desire?
Of course, you see, I don't really know what you mean by organic, because even GMO can equally be organic. But that's, by the way, let me just go into the main issue that you're trying to raise. The fact remains that GMOs is just a step ahead of what the conventional means could not go beyond. You know, in hybrid, for example, you can do hybridization and produce a crop that maybe has higher yield, maybe in terms of bigger size of maybe corn seed, for example. But no matter how you do the hybridization of that, it does not prevent it from attack by insect, for example. So that is the highest hybridization could go. Now, scientists have discovered that no matter how you produce a hybrid, it will not be resistant to Maruca, for example. So the only way out, and instead of using chemical to spray, you end up killing other non-target insects. And that is one of the major issues in risk assessment in biosafety. You look at, will this modification affect non-target organisms? If you are spraying chemical now, you will kill all the insects in addition to the Maruca, for example, that is attacking BT cowpea. But with this modification, it is specific. You look at the amino acid sequence, the gene, and you know, one thing you need to understand, science is a very straightforward something. You look at all the attributes you display today are as a result of your genetic makeup. So if you pick a gene that codes for red eye coloration, if you introduce it into any other living organism, that is what it will produce, it will manifest. So these genes, we have, if you look at what do you call, how these genes have been banked, you can pick any gene, you already know the sequence of it, and you know what it codes for. You know the protein is going to produce. Anywhere you take that gene to, that is what is going to manifest. So if this gene has no homology or resemblance with any toxin already profiled, there is no way you introduce that gene into another organism and it to begin to produce toxin or trigger allergy. So you see, that's why I get surprised at times when some issues are being raised about this GMO. In the time past, we think maybe it's as a result of lack of information, which lead to misinformation. But to some extent, it's more of disinformation. Some people are just, they have preconceived notions
How
about.
do you respond to the arguments that are made that these modified organisms also have the capacity, just like the chemicals, to cause a lot more damage beyond what you intend to regulate?
Yes, that is why we call regulation, because you are now trying to check if a scientist says this thing is to help kill only Maruca, it means in your risk assessment, you are checking whether it affects even fall armyworm, for example, which is a non-target, or it affects even maybe grasshopper within the field. So by the time you subject that to field experiment, you will now discover that you can even directly induce this particular organism that is targeted. And then you see, and then other organisms that are not targeted, and then you see the manifestation. That's the essence of what we call confined field trial that we carry out.
The ones you have done,
yes.
What has been the impact on the soil, on the environment,
yes,
where you plant these things?
Yes, that is what we are saying. When they do confined field trial, we go there every time and we collect our own data and then look at how those things perform in the environment. And so far, all the issues that have been raised by people are not really the way it is. The issue of non-target organism effect has already been taken care of. There was no any issue of effect on non-target organism, for example. Even in the soil, there is no any effect of it in the soil because the modification was not meant to produce any other thing in the soil. If this gene is to act on this, definitely that gene will specifically act on that. And if it does not act, we will not give any approval.
Okay, let me bring Mr. Donald in at this point in time. A number of issues have been raised here, allaying the fears of consumers that, look, these genetically modified crops or plants are safe for human consumption. I will come back to Mrs. Ahmed later on to look at the whole issue of food sovereignty that you talked about. But for now, what is the evidence on ground that these organisms impact the environment negatively, they affect other crops and insects on the ground that may be very useful to the growth of organic materials and all of that? What's the evidence that we have?
Okay, so let me start by, first of all, correcting something he said, because he said GMOs can be organic. GMO can never be organic because GMO is not natural. The reason it's GMO is because it's abnormal. GMO, it's an abnormal technology. It goes contrary to nature. GMO is you taking the gene of an organism and introducing it to a new gene of a particular organism to get your own desired traits, not nature's desired traits. So let's first of all correct it. It is not a natural process. Nature would never mate a dog and an orange. Nature would never mate tomato and mango. Nature would not do that. Nature would not bring two species together. Only scientists can do that. And the scientists have their own objectives. So within all of this whole GMO debate, for those that know me, I try to avoid it because a lot of time it hurts when regulators start to sound like marketers. A lot of the questions you're asking, it would be nice if it is Monsanto, the buyer, the Syngenta, the people that produce the seed and the chemicals. They should be the ones sitting down and explaining this process, not the regulator. Regulator's job is to protect the people, protect the sovereignty of the people, not defend the technology. So part of what she said is when you sell beans, market women sell it in different days. So that situation she just mentioned, it's a clear example of you not even following precaution. Article 7.5 of the World Health Organization and FAO on chemical management, they advise countries that as precaution, don't import, don't grow, don't sell, don't distribute. If you know that from your risk assessment, there's an issue, if you notice that your risks, you don't have a risk mitigation measure in place, and if you notice that your market structure cannot handle it, don't go ahead. It is there. Regulators need to have this type of information at the back of their hands. What we're doing is, like I said, it's enthusiasm. I'm not going to say, oh, regulators have collected money and all of that. I'm not going to say that. But it's enthusiasm. We're being too enthusiastic to jump into something we don't even know what the outcome will be in the next 5, 6, 7 years. Now, you've asked what is the evidence. What evidence do we have on our hand? If you ask promoters, if you ask marketers, if you Google, you'll see tons of research on promoting GMO, those against GMO. It's a question of who is doing the research. It's a question of who's sponsoring the research, who's sponsoring the field trip, who's sponsoring the lab. The sponsorer determines your outcome. You would hardly get a research that's without the influence of anybody, especially in a country where institutions are poorly funded, the schools, the institutions don't work. So what it simply means is who's behind the research, who's sponsoring the workshop, who's sponsoring the trips. Now, my own argument, it's coming from those countries that have taken strong stands to restrict GMO, to strongly regulate GMO, to enforce labeling. What is wrong? Why have they made such move? Now, if we're going to introduce GMO, what measures have those people put in place? How can we put those measures in place? If we cannot put them in place, why go there? Now, another question would ask is, why did we even need the GMO in the first place? You made very good assumptions. What is our issue? If we bring agriculture and food system, if I ask my colleagues here, what are the 5 major challenges facing agriculture and food security in Nigeria? None of them would mention the seed quality. Why? Because that is not the root cause of our problem. The root cause of our problems are this. 70% of our farming, which is also a strength, 70% of our agriculture is done by smallholder farmers, women farmers. A lot of those women don't have access to land because of traditional issues, and government has not paid enough attention to give women access to land. Second, today, insecurity is a big problem. We know that very well. Climate change has driven cattle all the way. So cattle get into your farm, they eat. If you snap or you make a video, send it to police. The police will tell you, make cow eat small now. So insecurity is there. People can no longer go to the farms. We don't have a problem with food insecurity in this country. We're already wasting 40% of our food. Why is that? Because farmers cannot store. Marketers cannot store. Why are we not addressing all the money we're putting in? GMO, all the campaign, all the noise, all the effort. Why are we not putting into governments fix insecurity? Why are we not putting into, okay, how do we cut down those 40% food wastages? Why are we not putting so much effort and call all our development partners, the Monsanto, the Syngentas, all of our development partners? Why are we not calling them, bring all your donor fund, let's give money to Meite Allah, give money to all those people doing open grazing, incentivize them to go into ranching. Why are we not even doing those things? These are the most pressing and important issues.
Okay, Madam, let me bring you in at this point. And you just mentioned the point that I wanted to stress with you, which is the impact these GMOs are having on smallholder farmers. The fact that it is said that GMO plants cannot be replanted, unlike the normal organic plants. They cannot be replanted. So you have the smallholder farmer has to depend on having to buy the crops every time he or she wants to plant.
This is a myth. You can replant GM seeds. You can replant GM seed. I'm saying it again and again. You can replant GM seeds.
So if I harvest
just like
today, if I harvest now,
yes, you can replant
and I have
it
to replant next year,
yes,
I can replant GMO seeds.
You can replant GM seed. And even for the conventional, if you're your opportunity to meet with the farmers, even the conventional seeds they have, over time, if they farm from a particular, and they are replanting it again, with time, the viability of that seed reduces. So they have to go and get a fresher one. So saying that GMO seeds cannot be replanted, that is not it. GMO seeds can be replanted. And me, I'm sitting down here, I'm not a promoter of the technology, I'm a regulator of the technology. So, and what I regulate is based on science, and we've done it. And this is not the first time we're bringing in GM seed. We've been eating GM in this country for over 30 years. Because any of us seated here, I'm sure we must have tested Kellogg's cornflakes.
Without knowing it.
Before the agency came into being.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean,
yes.
without knowing it, Nigerians
yes.
have been eating it.
Yes,
but
we've been eating it.
Since the agency came into being, is there a proper labeling of these products for Nigerians to know that, look, I'm buying a GMO product?
Yes, we even had a stakeholders meeting, which 2 directors of NAFDA were part of that labeling regime meeting. The meeting is still ongoing. The 2 directors came from Lagos. I don't know whether they came without the permission of their director general to come and attend a 4-day meeting in 4 days meeting in Abuja. They are part of the labeling regime. That is what we are working on. And we've been importing GM into this country since 2017. We've been importing GM maize and GM cowpea and also GM wheat into this country since 2017. And we've been eating it in one way or the other. Even if it is meant for feed, we've been eating it.
We get most of our wheat from Eastern Europe, or the old Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, and the rest of them. And in those countries, they do not tolerate GMOs.
No, so far because of the war.
So where
and
are
all
these
that,
other ones coming from?
It's coming from Argentina. They have GM wheat, which is imported into this country.
What of livestock? Have we started producing GMO livestock?
No, not yet.
You have not done any scientific assessment on that regard?
Not at all for now.
Okay.
Yes, but we already are working on developing the guidelines, because there are other countries that are already doing such research. So we just want to take a proactive step to make sure that before such a thing comes into Nigeria. You see, most of the problems we are having here is because we Africans, we over-belittle ourselves, thinking this science is not a rocket science that you say you cannot do it. Let's say, for example, you want to check whether GM food is safe or not. If I say telomerase is confirmed safe by MBMA, you think it is not so. I don't think it's too costly to run what we call compositional analysis or a toxicity test of that product. You pick telomerase, you pick the conventional one, you run your proximate analysis. If you think what MDMA says is not correct, you run this test and then you check. When it comes to the issue of food safety, it's even the easiest thing you can. And even NAFDAC have been given approval for all this, and they are already in their shelf, and they have even approved them, and they have never, by checking such, they've never seen anything toxic or allergic about it. So, but people will keep, the same information is being recycled and issues are being raised. But you see, MBMA, it is not the function of MBMA to come out to defend the technology. But the fact is, the MBMA regulation is not meant to hamper technological innovation, but to complement it with focus on the issue of safety. We are to regulate it. And if you don't believe that something works, you don't even talk about regulation. You talk of banning. You talk of pushing it aside. But Europe, for example, that we are talking about, they only say we are regulating it by not planting, but we import them for us to use it. A lot of other countries do that. And if a country decides that we don't want GMO, I think that it can be for political reason. It might not be for scientific, even if it is for publish. You see, NBMA is very open. That if you think what we do is not correct, come and meet us and bring your evidence to counter us.
What of the aspect of nutrition?
Yes.
Because one of the arguments that had been made earlier on is that there's increased nutrition with GMOs. But there is the other side of it. There is a scientific risk assessment that says there is, in fact, a loss of nutrition in these GMO plants.
You see, modification, it depends on what you are modifying for. If you are modifying for pest resistance, that is the attribute that will be conferred on that crop. If you want to modify it for increasing nutritional value, that is what it will increase. So every modification has specific purpose for which it is being modified. But you see, people will just look at it from the general point of view and just say this thing. NBMA is very open that if you say this GMO is not safe, just come and say Taylor maize is not safe, and then you bring your evidence. NBMA is not just for, it's not for promoters, no, it's for everybody based on, but we work based on scientific evidence. If you provide us with evidence, we work based on what you are saying. But when you say GMOs are not safe, totally, it becomes very difficult for us to even know
safety is just one aspect of this.
Because what we are trying to say, even in US, even in Europe, they deal with GMO on a case-by-case basis. Europe has approved over 100, but there are some they turn down. That shows that if they turn down this one, they are not comfortable with it. The ones they approve, it means they know that it is okay. So if in Nigeria, if you come out, no, in Nigeria more often than not, nobody talks about whether Taylor maize is not safe. They tell you GMOs are not safe, and it gives
That's the question I'm asking. Are there any specific GMOs that we have turned down in Nigeria because scientifically you have been able to prove that they are not safe?
So far, the ones that have been presented to NBMA, which are just 3 that have been commercialized, but other ones are still under confined field trial. So we have not concluded on their safety. So we cannot talk about those ones yet until we are done with the safety risk assessment. But the ones we have done risk assessment and we have certified them safe, they are safe. And we are very open that anyone who says these things are not safe, you come with superior evidence, and NBMA will certainly listen to you. Okay. But when you just talk and say the entire GMO is not safe, when NBMA has already done its own risk assessment and found out these ones are safe, then I don't really know where you want us to start from.
Okay, Madam Ahmed, the issue of food sovereignty, you have not addressed that. I mean, what do GMOs do to the food sovereignty of individual nations? Because you are, as it were, a country is now dependent on these imported GMO products and neglecting its own food production.
For the food sovereignty you've talked about, for GM, as Adamu has rightly stated, this is something that is done. It has nothing to do with the biodiversity or the land or the food sovereignty. It has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with that. And now what we are talking about, we are only talking about Taylor maize. It's the only seed that so far has been commercialized into Nigeria. But so far, apart from Taylor maize, we don't have any seeds that have been commercialized in Nigeria. So we can't just jump into conclusion or just go to social media and read stories and come up with stories. You have to give us facts. You have to bring your own findings. We are here as regulators. That is why we do the public display, 21 days public display. If you have anything, you come up with it. We are not promoters of this technology, but rather regulators of this technology.
So, Donald,
Yeah.
what would be your response to these arguments that have been made, particularly the fact that Madam says that it has nothing to do with food sovereignty, it has nothing to do with the environment?
Okay, so first of all, before I answer that question, let me also say that a house divided against itself would not stand. And what I perceive, it's that we're beginning to grow a culture where anything that looks like a contrary opinion to us, we kind of like push it away and discard it and say, no, 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 don't come close, we don't want to hear. And it's also disturbing for me also that we're not also looking at, we're not giving evidences or even checking what's happening in other countries. Other countries that have done this, what's the impact? So he talked about case-by-case basis of GMO in EU and the rest of them. And if he has been following the trend, you'll know that MON, which is Monsanto 810, it's banned in France, banned in Algeria, banned in Germany, banned in so many countries. It's one species of GM maize by Monsanto. It's banned in a lot of those countries. If he's been following the trend, you would also know that in India, now this is on food sovereignty to answer her question. In India, when BT cotton was introduced in India and maize, as we speak today, one of the biggest issues is farmers in India committing suicide. In Mexico, chemical companies and seed companies are taking farmers to court for redistribution and sharing seed. Such interplay almost happened in Kenya. In Nigeria, we have Plant Variety Act 2021 that gives these companies the right to control, sell, and redistribute, and they have a right to sue or punish any farmer that stores or redistributes. It's in the Act. I'm mentioning our own law. Yeah? We also have a Patent and Invention Act in this country. They know about it, or maybe they need to go and check also, that gives inventor the right to control his product and the distribution and sales. Now, GMOs, these GMOs, Stella Maize and the rest of them, are they owned by Nigeria? They are not owned by Nigeria. Who's the owner of Stella Maize? They will tell us who the owners are. And they will tell us if the owners have sole control and proprietorship over redistribution, sales, and all of that. They should tell us, because there's an owner to Stella Maize. And there's a law existing in Nigeria, passed by our National Assembly, that gives those people the right. They can wake up tomorrow and say they want to sue. And Nigerian court is going to pass judgment in their favor. So that's food sovereignty. If they've been aware of following the issue of GMO, I talked about herbicide-resistant GMO. These are GMO seeds that you've designed in a way where you can go to a place where you have lots of weed, plant that seed, it grows, you bring glyphosate or any other herbicide, spray around, it would kill all the weeds there, and your GMO seed will still be standing tall. That's a herbicide-resistant GM. He's an expert and he should know. We also have the insect-resistant GM. Any insect or the target insect that eats it would die. Beneficial insects, bee and pollinators, as regulators, you should be following the statistics on the number of beneficial insects. What is the bee population size in Nigeria and all over the world? It's declining. These are pollinators. We're talking about rodents and the rest of them. They are declining drastically. Today, we have something called superweed. These are weeds that have grown resistant to herbicides. Now, if you have a GM, and that GM, when you plant it, you apply a chemical that kills every other weed and it's still standing, what signal have you sent to the farmer? Apply more chemicals, your weeds will die, you'll still be growing. So these are science that are all over the place and they know it. So anybody that tells you that this GM is Nigerian farmers have authority over it, it's a lie. Anybody that tells you you can store it and bring it and replant it and it will give you as much yield as it did year one, it's a fat lie. Now, let me also correct an impression because she said something.
Done that very quickly because
I'll round up because we need to, so
time.
that next time we don't say such in public. Let's not say we have been importing GM into Nigeria long ago. We've not been importing because it now sounds like Nigerian government has been importing. They have been entering the country. These are smuggling. So NAFDAC has come out when their agency was formed. They were still baby. NAFDAC came out and said we have not approved any GM. We know how porous our borders are. We know how the labs are. How many private individuals will go and do, I want to do and do testing for my GM? How many labs do we even have in Nigeria that can do such tests? Where's the money? So now that they've said they've done the risk assessments, make it public. Let us also see.
Well, they say they are going to make it public.
When?
Well, that's left for them to tell us.
Okay.
The way, because it says a process. When the process is completed, we definitely will know. And we will come back here and interrogate the outcomes of those, of the results of that test. Thank you so much, madam and gentlemen, for your time. Our time is up. We must go. Mrs. Hawa Tahir Ahmed is Director, Biosafety Enforcement Operations Department at the National Biosafety Management Agency. Thank you so much for your time. And Donald Ikenna Fuegbu, Senior Program Manager, Heinrich Bo Stefan, here in Abuja. Thank you so much. And Bisabo Adamu is Assistant Chief Scientific Officer at the National Biosafety Management Agency. Thank you for finding time to join us. That's our program for today. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of the program, People, Politics, and Power. And as we promised, when the results of that test comes out, we invite Madam and Mr. Adamu back here to come and give us an insight into all of that. Thank you and goodbye.